everyone, and welcome back to week 8. This week we're going to be discussing the constructed response test items. Last week we worked on selected response items, and those were a little bit different, as you're going to be able to see here. In constructed response items, students must supply the answer. So you remember last week, multiple choice answers were supplied. So this is a selected response, and students just had to pick the right answer. Constructed response, they actually have to write the answer. Sometimes you might hear them called supply type items. There are 3 types of constructed response items that we're going to discuss. One, completion items called fill in the blanks. You might have heard them called that. Second, short answer item where the student writes between one word and a short paragraph. And third, essay items where students write longer responses to more complex questions. The first type of constructed response item we're going to discuss is the completion item, or the fill in the blank. If you think about a fill in the blank, it's good for measuring simple knowledge because generally you're only looking for a word or two from the student, and that also makes it easy to write and score. However, it's less useful for measuring complex content or higher level thinking skills. So for example, if you're trying to get at reasons and cause and effect, that's going to be much harder to measure through a fill in the blank. It also provides less coverage of content because you're generally measuring only one specific thing at a time. Let's take a look at some examples of good completion items and think about why they might be good. The most common gas in the Earth's atmosphere is blank. You'll notice several good things about this item. First of all, it's clearly worded with words that aren't overly complicated, and the blank comes at the end of the sentence, which is generally something we encourage you to do. The second one is a person who draws the pictures for a book is called a or an. This use of a parens n is a way to cleverly avoid giving students a tip for the answer. If I had the answer here is illustrator, and so normally you would say an illustrator, but if I had just put an, it would be a tip to the students that the answer starts with a vowel. So whenever you put a, you might want to consider putting it the way it is here, n, even for answers that start with consonants. There are some guidelines for developing good fill-in-the-blank or completion items. You want to avoid the use of verbatim sentences for your textbooks because students will often memorize these, and this does encourage memorization. So paraphrase your ideas. Word the sentence so that only a single answer is correct. So ask yourself, are there any other possible answers here? Because you will get them on tests if you use questions that have more than one answer. As I said before, you should place the blank at the end of the sentence. And if answered in numerical units, specify the unit required. So you might get an answer in 10 milliliters, for example, when you're looking for 10 centimeters. And as I said before, avoid clues to the correct answer. Let's move on to short answer items. These are a little bit different than the completion items because here student supplies a word, a few words, or a sentence or two in response to a question. It can actually be up to a full paragraph. And so you might ask, what's the difference between this and a completion items? The difference is that there's no blank here to fill in. Students respond more naturally to a direct question. This is better at assessing more knowledge and higher level comprehension, as well as some higher level thinking. The disadvantage is that it's a little more subjective and the scoring is a little longer and more subjective. Let's take a look at some examples of good short answer items. Rich River serves as a border between Ohio and Kentucky. This is a very good short answer item because there's a definite answer. The question is worded clearly, and you'll notice that it doesn't have a blank to just fill in a word here. A second one is, what is the volume of a tetrahedron with edge length of 1? Provide your response to the nearest thousandth. So this is an example of a very good short answer item because it's very specific. you're looking for a unit, and you're looking for the thousandth of the unit. And finally, list the 3 branches of the U.S. government. This is obviously has a very accurate answer, and it's good for short answer. There are some guidelines for developing effective short answer items. First, you should state the item so that only one answer is correct. Or if you're looking for a list, like in the last question, only one of several correct answers in a list. State the item so that the required answer is brief. Do not use questions verbatim from textbooks or other instructional materials, as we discussed before, and designate units required for the answer. Now let's turn to essay items. All of us remember the dreaded essay items from school, but the reason that teachers use them is they really do both help teachers assess complex thinking and reinforce complex thinking, because research has shown the more that students write and are challenged to write at a higher level, the more their thinking evolves. This is where students write a longer response on a more complex topic. It's good for assessing higher level thinking skills and really understand their understanding of the content. The drawbacks are that it's difficult to score, it's time consuming, especially if you're giving feedback, and this is a big one. Teachers often confuse writing ability with content area. So think about what you're really scoring. Are you really going to score students' understanding of the knowledge and their ability to apply the knowledge and skills, or are you scoring how well they write? So later when we talk about scoring rubrics, we're going to come into this a little bit more. There are 2 types of essays that we're going to discuss. One is the restricted response or short answer, and one is the extended response that calls for a much longer answer. If you think about those of you who have taken the ALST, both of these types of essay items are on the ALST. You're guided through a series of restricted or response or short answers, and then you have to write a longer extended answer at the end. There are some guidelines for developing effective essay items. First of all, you need to construct the item to elicit skills identified in the learning target. So, think about the words that you use when you write your learning target. If you're saying things like analyze, if you're saying things like evaluate, you want your essay item to be able to determine whether students have that skill in this area. You write the item to clarify the specific task. So you want to be very clear about what it is you're asking them to do and not leave any room for missing the target. So you want to say, for example, if you want them to give reasons, provide 3 reasons. You should indicate approximately how much time students should spend on an essay item. Students are very poor judges of this, especially younger students. And so in late elementary or middle school, when you're starting to use these types of items, you might put on the test, try to spend 15 minutes on this. You might have someone that age try to write on this item, or you might take it yourself and see how long it takes you to write on it. Finally, avoid giving students options as to which essay questions they will answer. This is a very old technique, and I've seen teachers use it where they say answer 2 of the 3. Well, the problem with this is that students will obviously pick the ones they're stronger on, and you won't really understand if they their knowledge about the learning objective or learning objectives that they leave off. Scoring essays is problematic. And so let's step through how you would score an essay. First of all, before we get into this, I want to say that, again, I want to emphasize that try to separate writing ability from content knowledge, and that's really, really hard to do. How do you begin scoring an essay? First, you need to think about what constitutes a good answer and sort of outline that either in bullet form or in outline form. What are you looking for in a complete and whole answer? This could be knowledge of different content areas in the question. This could be thinking skills, as I said before. Think about what your learning target is. Once you have a bulleted list of several items, then you have to select an appropriate scoring method. And we're going to talk about two. Holistic is one and analytic is another. 3, clarify the role of writing mechanics. I'm not saying you should never score writing, and writing can certainly be a part of your rubric. However, it should not constitute the majority of the score. I've seen rubrics that evaluate content knowledge, and 75% of the score is really writing mechanics. And in that case, you're giving very little weight to the content and way too much weight to the writing mechanics. So you have to think about that delicate balance. Generally, I don't like to see writing mechanics be more than about 20 or 25% at the most of the rubric score. Once you have your rubric designed and you're ready to score, we're going to talk about a little bit more about how to do that. When you actually start scoring, it's recommended to score one item at a time and keep the identity of the student anonymous. A good way to do this is just to have students put their names on the back of the paper, and then you don't see them. Of course, we recognize students' handwriting, so it's almost impossible unless you have them type the essay, which is for many reasons sometimes impractical, but it does help. Score one question or one item for all the students, and then shuffle the papers, and then come back and score a second if there's a second essay. And the reason for doing this is you sometimes grade easier or harder on the first couple of essays. Once you get going, you get a sense of the answers, and you're able to score a little more objectively. Let's talk about holistic scoring and what that means. In holistic scoring, the teacher makes an overall judgment about the essay answer and gives it a single score or grade. This is most appropriate for extended essays. There's a really nice example of holistic scoring, a rubric on page 205, figure 8.8. So if you want to pause this video and take a look at that, it will refresh your memory. Teachers will often establish anchor papers to help them, to guide them. So, for example, if you have a set of papers your first year through with an essay question, and you have a very clear 5 paper and a very clear 4 paper and a very clear 3 paper, you might want to Xerox them and save them, or save them in some way so you can compare future papers to them. These are called anchor papers. Analytic scoring is a little bit different in that after you've decided the components of grading, you put each component on a separate row of the rubric and give that component a point value. There's a nice example of this on page 206 of your text in figure 8.9. Let's take a look at an example of holistic versus analytic scoring. Here's the essay prompt. All of us make decisions daily. Most of these decisions are unimportant: what to wear, what to eat, where to go Friday night, in terms of long-term effects. Sometimes a decision presents a real dilemma because of its possible consequences. Entering the service before going to college, playing high school sports, or working after school, ending a relationship. In your essay, tell about a time when you or someone you know faced such a dilemma. Make sure you describe the dilemma and the consequences in the way in which the decision was made with specific details. This is an example of a high school writing prompt essay that's looking to judge writing as the content knowledge. So this is a little bit different than, let's say, if you were doing science or social studies. Here, writing can become a focus of the rubric because the subject is writing or language arts. So here's an example of a holistic scoring rubric that could be used to score that essay. Let's look carefully at the components. First of all, you'll notice that the scores range from 4, which is an exceptional paper, to 1, which is a poor paper. Generally, you do give a number to each level. What would an exceptional paper look like? Let's read the description. The focus is very clearly stated. The paper is well organized. Major ideas are set off by paragraphs. The tone is consistent and appropriate. No mechanical errors. All references are clearly cited and formatted. So this is what a 4 paper would look like. So when you're looking and scoring papers, if one of those is off maybe a little bit, or 1 or 2 even, you could still give it a 4. It's just your overall sense and a set of guidelines about what a 4 paper would look like. Don't get too rigid. Like if the paper has everything else complete and it's missing 1 reference, you could still give it a 4. What would a good paper look like that got a 3? The focus is clearly stated instead of very clearly stated. The paper is mostly organized. Maybe there's a little bit of organizational issue, maybe minor. Most major ideas are set off by paragraphs. The tone is mostly consistent and appropriate. A few mechanical errors may be present, and 1 or 2 references may be missing or incorrectly formatted. So if you get a sense that the paper has most of these characteristics, you might give it a 3. Notice the difference between the 3 and the 4. Words like mostly, most are in the good, whereas all or consistently are in the exceptional. Further down the scale, a developing paper, you see a little bit of a degradation in performance. Although focus may wander, it is discernible. Paper may have organizational issues. Major ideas are not always separated by paragraphs. Tones sometimes may be consistent or inconsistent or inappropriate. Many mechanical errors, but they do not interfere with communication. You can still understand the paper. More than 2 references may be missing or incorrectly formatted. There are a couple of sophisticated things here that I want to call your attention to. Many mechanical errors, but they do not interfere with communication. That's a good way to call out a writing issue with mechanical errors. Whereas you're going to see in the next level down, you can't understand the paper. Another one is the use of numbers to quantify problems, so more than 2 references. Finally, a poor paper, the focus wanders and it may not be discernible and is not discernible. The paper may have more major organizational issues. Most major ideas may not be separated by paragraphs. You can see that this paper is just not hitting, or it's hitting almost none of the marks. In analytic scoring, we take those same components and we put them into rows. So think about what the components of the holistic scoring rubric were. One was focus. And so all we've done is taken focus and broken it down on a row. We put organization on a row, tone on a row, mechanical or errors on a row, and references on a row. And then we quantify or describe each level. So these are the same levels that were in the previous rubric, but we've just put them in a column. So for example, an exceptional 4, the focus was very clearly stated. In a good, it was clearly stated. In a 2, developing, it may wander, but it's still discernible. And in a poor, the focus wanders and is not discernible. So for each row, you're going to score it on that particular component rather than holistically. So a student might get a 3 on a focus and a 4 on organization and 2 on tone and 3 on mechanical errors and 4 on reference, and then you add those points up for total points. So here the point value is going to be much higher, but don't get confused thinking it's a better result. It's just a different scoring system. So a student might get a 16 out of 20, for example. So the advantage of analytic scoring is it allows you to be very precise and give feedback to your students. If you want, you can take this rubric and extend it by 1 column and have a feedback column, suggesting ways that students can improve. whereas on the other one, it's a little more less fine level. It's a little more general. You can still give feedback to students, but students sometimes don't really understand where their areas of strength and weakness. The disadvantage to analytic scoring, obviously, is that it's more time consuming. Finally, once again, a note about assessing content. Be sure you're assessing your learning objectives and don't give too much weight to writing unless, and like in this example, that is what you are actually assessing because it's a language arts activity. Otherwise, you're not assessing content. Just a note about this week's assignments. You will be required on the discussion board to develop a holistic scoring rubric for a given exam question. You should post your scoring rubric to the discussion board by Sunday as usual, and then an in-depth response to a colleague. So please use your lecture, readings, and other materials to provide a way to make that rubric better. I will provide feedback as well. Your quiz project draft is due by this Sunday. Please use the course email to email it to me as a Word document attachment. Don't upload it yet because this isn't your final. I'm going to provide feedback to you through the course email, and you should submit the final assignment using the assignment link on the course content homepage by next week, next Sunday. Remember, if you're doing this with a partner, you have to submit 15 items, not 10, and both your names should be on that, and you should both upload it to the assignment link. You should also both email it to me this week. So I hope you have a great week, everybody, and I'll see you next time.